I grew up in church while simultaneously making choices that were not in alignment with God's good plan for sex. And so I know what it's like to sit in church during a series on sex and feel terrible. At times, I felt angry. I felt attacked. I felt judged. Other times, I just felt confused and lost because I didn't like what I was hearing, but I also knew my life wasn't working. But what I did know all the time, and what I felt all the time, I should say, is I felt shame. Because I knew deep down inside that what I was doing was wrong. And I also knew that the choices that I was making, they weren't only hurting me, they were hurting the people around me. And if I had a main influence during my young life, the main influence I had was the voice in my own head. The voice in my head that told me that the people around me knew. If they knew what I was doing, what I was thinking, what I was looking at, then they wouldn't want me to be around them. They wouldn't accept me. The voice in my head assured me that nobody could fully love me or fully know me and still fully love me. That is how I felt, and that what I know, having lived this, is I know that there are people that can hear my voice right now who feel the same way. Well, this message is for you. Because the promise of the series was and has been the last 3 weeks that we would end our series on a message about restoration and renewal. If you feel shame or you feel convicted or you feel lost, that this message would be talking about how to find your way back to God's good plan. But I do want to give you something right up front. The thing I want to give you right up front is that today is not going to include a lot of observations about what the culture says about sex and sexuality. That was the last 3 weeks. And today's not going to be filled with tons of, I got good advice for you. Because if you're lost in shame, then your first need is not good advice. Your first need is to be loved in a way you are incapable of loving yourself. And I was helped with this. When I was younger, I was helped. I was helped by great pastors like Cam, like Dave Allgaier, like Ben Stewart, who are wise enough to know that in the place of shame like this, that what people really need is for people to get out of the way so that you can put your eyes on Jesus. That's what we're doing today. Because, look, I know this is hard for many of you to understand or even feel or connect. It can hit your brain, but doesn't hit your heart. But there is someone that truly, fully knows you and still truly, fully loves you. His name is Jesus. And the way you can know that he loves you is because he has brought you here today to meet with him, like he did long ago for another man who was crippled by shame. His name was Peter, and the account is in John 21. It starts like this. It says, later, Jesus appeared again to the disciples beside the Sea of Galilee. This is how it happened. Several of the disciples were there. Simon Peter was there. Thomas, nicknamed the twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples. Today, we are focusing on the first name there, Simon Peter, or known as Peter. If you're familiar at all with the life of Jesus, then you know Peter, because Peter's a very memorable disciple, all right? He's very impulsive. He's a ready, fire, aim kind of dude. And so he's like the Michael Scott or the Andy Dwyer of the disciples, okay? If it gets to his brain, it's coming out of his mouth, but it's coming out of his mouth with complete sincerity. That was Peter. That led to big ups and big downs. Famously, one of those kind of ups and downs situations is one day Jesus is walking with his followers. He's walking along the road. He asks them, hey, what's the scuttlebutt about me? What are people out there saying about me? And they say, they're saying you're a prophet or maybe the second coming of a famous figure in ancient Israel. And Jesus says, okay, but what do you say about me? And Peter, always first to the fray, he says, I believe you're the Christ, the promised king, the Son of the living God. And Jesus daps him up. He's like, that's right, Peter. That's right. And I'm going to build God's kingdom. I'm going to build my church on that statement of faith. And then to bring people into that kingdom, I am going to die for their sins. At which point, Peter spoke back up and went, bad idea, Jesus. Look, first response, bad plan. Look, I think, though, if we put our heads together here, we can come up with something better than that. I'm pretty confident about that. But the whole dying thing's off the table. And you can imagine the other disciples, right? They're in the background, trying to look at anything else other than what's about to happen because Jesus is about to come off the top rope. And he did. He rebukes Peter. He basically kind of lays out the fact that, hey, Peter, you don't have the authority to stop a plan that God set in place in Genesis 3, okay? Now, that's Peter, though. Mountaintop to crash and burn in the course of one conversation. That's Peter. Now, the reason that I give you kind of the context for Peter is that now that takes us into closer to John 21. Because John 21 happens after something else that Jesus predicted. Because Jesus also predicted that he'd rise from the dead, proving himself to be the Son of God, giving hope to any of his followers that they could do the same. And that happened. But Peter's worst moment was not the moment that I just described. Peter's worst moment happened right before the arrest and death of Jesus. On the night before he was betrayed, Jesus reminds his followers, I'm going to die. But this time he adds another prediction. He says, and when I'm arrested, all of you will abandon me. And Peter, and this will shock you, Peter had something to say about that. He goes, no, Jesus, no. Those guys are scrubs. They might walk out on you, but me, Jesus, I will never walk out on you. I will never leave your side. Even if I have to die for you, I won't abandon you. And Jesus said, more gently this time than maybe the previous, he says, no, Peter, before the rooster crows in the morning, you're not going to deny me once. You're going to deny me 3 times. And it happened exactly as Jesus said it would. Jesus is arrested, his followers scatter, but Peter kind of follows along at a distance. And as Jesus is going through his trial, Peter sets up around a fire with some other people, kind of watching from that distance. But as he's standing around that fire, people there recognize him. They go, weren't you with Jesus? Aren't you one of his followers? Aren't you one of his friends? 3 times he's asked, 3 times he denies it. On the 3rd time, the rooster crows. And in a truly tragic scene from Scripture, Peter looks back over to Jesus to find Jesus staring at him. And they meet eyes. And in that moment, Peter knows and realizes that the choices that he's made have contributed to the pain and the suffering of his friend, of his teacher, of his Lord. And so he begins to weep. And then he begins to run because the shame is too much. And in John 21, in a way, Peter is still running. And you might go, well, that seems weird because it didn't say he was with the other disciples. Well, he was. But look, in order to get him there with the other disciples, Peter required a personal invitation. Because when they found the empty tomb, there was an angel there. And the angel told the people that were there, go and tell his disciples, go and tell Jesus' disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. Peter's one of the disciples. Why does he require a personal name added to it? Because Peter would have assumed he wasn't invited if his name wasn't specifically used. He would have assumed he wasn't wanted. But he is wanted. John 21 continues. And the way it continues is Simon Peter goes, I'm going fishing. Now, when Jesus found Peter first, when they first met, Peter was a fisherman. Like not a hobbyist. I mean, that was his job. Family trade from the time he was a young man. This is what he did. This is who he was. And so when Peter says, I'm going fishing, that carries more weight than you or I. You know, if you and I said it, many of us would be like, that means that I want to go get a breath of fresh air, get out in nature, pick up a new hobby. But for Peter, this was his life. This was his job. And we'll even find out that he's about to go fishing all night. That's not something you do for fun. That's something you do if fishing is your job. But it turns out, as he goes out all night, nothing really good comes from it. They went out all night, but they caught nothing. And I love that. Because you know what that is? That's grace. That's grace. That's God in his grace making sure that Peter gets nothing but frustration and pain as he tries to run from Jesus. Because a good father isn't just going to let his kid go. Would you? Well, then the perfect father, how much more so? Is he going to make sure that Peter finds nothing good out there? Because God knows. He not only knows he has the power to do something about it, he knows that the best place for us to be is with Jesus. And so he's going to do whatever he can to get Peter back to Jesus, including if that means slapping fish away from his net all night long. And the thing that I want you to hear at all of our campuses, the thing that I want you to hear is that that's not something that God only did for Peter. It's something that he has been doing ever since. That when we're running, he gets in the way. It might be the very reason you're in a church service today.